West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
What could become one of America's enduring lies to itself about Afghanistan is being given birth on live TV these days. Last night on this network, an unnamed American military source in Afghanistan was quoted as saying that what we are seeing now in the American evacuation of Afghanistan is worse, much worse, than what we saw in 1975 in the American evacuation from Vietnam after we lost the war there. The problem with that kind of quote is that any unnamed military source in Afghanistan tonight is too young to remember the Vietnam War and was probably not born yet when we evacuated Vietnam in 1975. And so that source literally does not know what he or she is talking about. So, too, Republican Senator Ben Sasse, who said this today on television. What is happening at the Karzai International Airport today is a more shameful, lower moment in U.S. history than 1975 in Saigon. Ben Sasse was 3 years old in 1975. Ben Sasse literally does not know what he is talking about. Everything about Vietnam was much, much worse than what has happened in the American experience in Afghanistan. The total of American military personnel killed in Afghanistan over 20 years equals approximately just 1 month of American military deaths in Vietnam in May of 1968. And here is just one measure, and only one measure, of how much worse the American experience in Vietnam was. U.S. military deaths in Vietnam over roughly 13 years of active combat were 57,939. The American military deaths in Afghanistan over 20 years are 2,448. Of American military deaths alone, on that figure alone, Vietnam was 20 times worse than Afghanistan. When we fled Vietnam in defeat and disgrace, the number of American families who no longer knew why they lost a loved one in Vietnam was 20 times larger than the number of American families who are suffering with that feeling tonight about the loss of their loved ones in Afghanistan. We left behind millions of Vietnamese civilian and military personnel casualties in Vietnam. Millions of war dead in Vietnam and Cambodia. We left behind babies fathered by American soldiers. And yes, we left behind people who helped American reporters in Vietnam. We left behind all sorts of people who helped us in Vietnam. Evacuating armies always leave people behind, despite Hollywood mythology to the contrary. Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger illegally expanded the Vietnam War across the border into Cambodia, where they killed thousands of innocent victims with a sustained stream of bombs that we dropped from the skies. There is no measure by which the American experience in Afghanistan is worse than the American experience in Vietnam, but it is particularly American to believe that your personal version of an experience is always the best or the worst. And so for 49-year-olds like Ben Sass, who have never before witnessed the United States being driven out of a country in total military defeat, this must be the worst. The American military did not just terrorize Southeast Asia for 13 years with the Vietnam War. The American military and the American government terrified Americans at home in the Vietnam War, especially every American boy over 18 years old who had a draft card in his pocket that could get him sent to his death in Vietnam against his will. That terrified American families everywhere in this country for years. Families who were for or against the war were terrified of losing a son, losing a loved one in Vietnam. Vietnam was much worse. But if you are young enough to have never seen a draft card, never held one in your hands, you might not know that. I was a teenager protesting the Vietnam War, and so I, for one, have never been able to support America's entrance into another war because of the lessons of Vietnam. One of the lessons is that the American government and the American military do not know how to invade a country, lose a war, and then exit without chaos and dishonor. No one in the Pentagon knows how to do that. But it is their job to publicly pretend that they know how to do that. And none of the TV pundits who are telling you that we can do that, that we could have exited Afghanistan without chaos and dishonor, actually knows how to do that. When my cousin Johnny went to West Point before being shipped off to Vietnam and never coming back, West Point didn't teach him how to lose a war and exit a country gracefully. West Point still does not have a class on how to successfully and honorably exit a war that the American military loses. No one knows how to do that. It is not up to us how orderly the American exit from Afghanistan is. That is entirely up to the Taliban now. David Halberstam's brilliant book, The Best and the Brightest, told the story of how the best and the brightest minds from the Ivy League and American business and the foreign policy establishment were infected with the delusion during the Vietnam War that they could manage everything. That delusion is alive tonight in many of the best and the brightest in the American press corps, who seem to believe that the American military knows how to do things that it has never successfully done in its history. If you are outraged with what you are seeing in Afghanistan tonight, may it not be the end of the war that outrages you, but war itself. If you oppose what you're seeing in Afghanistan tonight, oppose war. War is hell. War is hell in the beginning, war is hell in the middle, and war is hell in the end if you lose. The best and the brightest thought hell was manageable. Because our Secretary of Defense, during the American buildup of forces in Vietnam in the 1960s, had successfully run the Ford Motor Company, the best and the brightest actually believed that he could successfully run and win the Vietnam War. The American military has the best equipment in the world. The American military may well have the best and brightest troops in the world, but America's successful opponents in Vietnam and Afghanistan have something that America has never had: patience. The North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong always knew that all they had to do was outlast the American military commitment to Vietnam, because American patience would run out. The Taliban always knew, because of that lesson in Vietnam, that all they had to do was patiently wait for the Americans to leave, and so the Taliban won by waiting. One very big difference between Afghanistan and Vietnam is that we never had a president who believed that he could charm the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong into a gentlemanly end of the war.
We had a very good conversation with the leader of the Taliban today, and they're looking to get this ended, and we're looking to get it ended. I think we all have a very common interest. The relationship is very good that I have with the mullah, and we had a good long conversation today, and they want to cease the violence. They'd like to cease violence also.
The person he had that conversation with is now the head of the Taliban in Afghanistan, after he had him released from prison. Today, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan explained some of what we are seeing in Afghanistan today to a White House press corps too young to remember how much worse it was in Vietnam.
We communicated with American citizens for weeks, telling them to get out of the country. We offered financial assistance for those who wouldn't be able to afford to get on flights themselves. Many chose to stay right till the end, and that was their choice. We now are faced with a circumstance where we have to help evacuate those. That's our responsibility as the U.S. government. But the point I'm making is that when a civil war comes to an end with an opposing force marching on the Capitol, there are going to be scenes of chaos. There are going to be lots of people leaving the country. That is not something that can be fundamentally avoided.
It is Wednesday, the 18th of August of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. And our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests while we put together this lovely egg dish with a velvety hollandaise sauce beyond compare. Beyond compare. Okay, Gunner, our sous chef, is snoozing away, as you can tell. He's such a hard worker, and that's why we love him. And he will always have a job here, because he does his job so well. Too well. How are you? The end of the war. It's the end of the war, you know. I remember how happy we all were when Vietnam ended. Because, I gotta tell you, that was a brutal war. And 44,000 of our guys, just our guys, are memorialized in D.C. on this really lovely monument. You can read every single name. You can go up there and have some paper and scratch their names onto the paper. It's it's a lot worse than what's happened ever in Afghanistan, as Lawrence laid out at the top there, and I think that was an opening of his show for the ages. And the reason that I thought it would be important to include is because it is important to remember, and for those who may stumble upon this show too young to remember, let those of us who do tell you it was a lot worse. And the bug out was a lot worse. All right. I don't know how much this can be put at the foot of Joe in terms of he should have had it better planned. When we already know, and everybody seems to discount, that the die was cast. I mean, we even have the pictures of Pompeo with the released Taliban leader from jail. Trump released 5,000 Taliban fighters and then proceeded to shut down military bases in the area. I wonder why. And we all wondered why at the time. And we knew what was up. Lay it at the foot of a Democrat, let them fix it, but blame them for the whole thing, even from when it started. Next thing we're going to hear is that G.W. Bush had to go into Afghanistan because the liberals forced him to. Yeah, that's the rhetoric of a bully. And I don't know. I always liked in America they didn't like bullies. We would kick the bullies' ass, and now we're the bullies. Maybe we always have been. Look what we did in our Western expansion. Just look. no materiel was spared, and, eliminating peoples that were just happened to be in your way. So, I guess we've always been bullies. I would like to argue that there's a sizable faction, tends to be the majority too. That's what's weird. 80 some odd million to 70 some odd million. 80 some odd million of us think that we should have, a bit of more empathy towards our fellow man, and equal protection and due process for all, with a capital A, for all. And to each to their own ability, and those who are unable should be helped. What's wrong with that? And maybe not enslave whole peoples to make a buck, and use corrupt means to hold on to power, and continue endless wars because you don't want to be held holding the buck. And the buck stops with Joe, and they're going to blame him for it. They already are. A lot of young whippersnappers, too young to even know what happened in Vietnam, when they say, oh, this is worse than Vietnam. No, it wasn't. I'm telling you, we're not going to have boat people of Afghanis coming up, just because a little bit harder to get here by boat. So, and I keep hearing like, oh, there's going to be like millions of them coming. Well, there was a bit of a exodus when Russia bugged out of Afghanistan. Come on. I mean, even the Simpsons. Well, Pakistani guy, but still, close. All right. We could always say that whatever country we happen to have a military conflict in, we get to experience their food. Something good comes out of it. Yeah. Okay. Not at the expense of all those human lives for all that time. And I got to tell you, people don't remember or don't recognize how long Vietnam had been going on. It was in my consciousness even before I started school. I mean, there were a few other things that came to the fore. We all remember, we were only in first grade for the, I think we were in first grade. That's right. For the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I remember diving under desks even before that. Yeah, diving under desks for the nuclear explosion drill. Like we were going to survive it. I bet the nuns knew. Yeah, that's when I was going to Catholic school. Mm-hmm. That's how I was forged. Anyway, Vietnam lasted for a long time. My whole childhood, all the way through high school. I was lucky. We had, at the point, the draft became a lottery. So you had a lottery number. Everybody had to register for the draft. That was another thing, too. Kids. And some of my classmates ended up going to the conflict just before it ended, which is always the worst time, I always thought. And it was for a few of them, too, because they never came back. Not because they found better digs. Well, the puns almost make themselves, but regardless, they were forcibly made to stop breathing and their hearts beating, because of projectiles coming their way and stopping on them. So, I was lucky. My lottery number was up too high. And I will confess that unlike one spoiled rich boy who used bone spurs as an excuse to keep out of the military, bone spurs. Can you believe that? I'd already had incurred some debilitating injuries in my knees that required surgery. And I may not have been able to pass a physical, being that, there's lots of things that athletes can do, but they could, on the field of play that they would never be able to do on the field of battle, mostly because you don't have a doctor on the sideline in the field of battle. You don't have a specialist there to make sure their franchise player, not that I was a franchise player, but you know what I mean. You don't have a personal physician accompanying you on the battlefield in case you need to be taped up or carted off. More likely you get carted off, and in that process you put others in danger. So I guess I got lucky. Yeah, I didn't have to go through any of that, or even the indoctrination process. I got to tell you, playing organized football on the collegiate level, that's militaristic enough. Even in high school, it was too militaristic for me. The idea of actually being in the military, yeah, I'm a survivalist. I'd probably put up with it. But I got lucky. I didn't have to go through that indoctrination process. I didn't have to actually have a choice of killing or being killed in the last few months of a conflict where they're still shooting at you. And you're told, just keep your heads down. Oh, thanks. And that bug out, once again, is nothing like what is happening in Afghanistan. A lot of it has to do with technology, too. But I think there was a big racial component, as there is now. When you look at some of these Fox clips, boy, talk about not only xenophobia, but just out and out racism. My God. And they want us to believe that they're the true Americans. No, that's not what a true American is, and I will fight that. That is not the ideal of even the slaver founders had in mind. All right? Well, the more enlightened slaver founders. I think there were some other slaver founders that pretty much broke off, and their progeny said, hey, let's start our own country where we can enslave people and make a buck. Well, what's on the rest of the show? Because the curated show is where we have some, law and order. Well, at least order. At the top here, at the top that was Lawrence breaking it down about the difference between Vietnam and Afghanistan, and thank you, Lawrence. On the rest of the menu, a federal lawsuit alleges Wisconsin authorities, meaning Kenosha and the cops, had a conspiracy with white supremacists that led to the Kyle Rittenhouse killings. The NRA's unabated corruption justifies shutting it down, and that's according to New York, and I think according to a lot more than just New York. And the FBI has joined the probe of a Colorado County election equipment security breach by embedded Trump supporters. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where hundreds of campsites were evacuated as France battles a massive wildfire near Saint-Tropez. And authorities in Sydney, Australia, warned that the worst is yet to come as Delta cases surge. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of the homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and that chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, so thank you, Kelly, for doing that and so much more. If you would then look across the page to the left from that chat room link, hopefully you'll find the link to our Patreon page, and if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, as some have done in the over 10 years that we have been this little powerhouse of resistance. If you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford the price of an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you pay for that espresso-type coffee drink, if you could, send us those funds instead. Yeah. And we will stretch those dollars along with the dollars we already have, and that allows us to pay our bills and fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance against this hostile takeover of America. No, we're not going to allow them to do it. We can't. And I also want to give a big shout out to 10 years of Kagro in the Morning. We've been on for over 10 years, and Kagro celebrates today. Yeah, that's right, the 18th of August. 10 years of Kagro in the Morning. Congratulations, Kagro. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio, and Tom takes care of that, and a whole lot more, too. Thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime, because that's where the real reportage is in the show notes and the links. So I then post that or link that up on social media like Twitter and other social media platforms. You know who they are. So do check out those show notes and links. Very important. Oh, indeed. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Okay. Our snoozing sous chef is working away. Yes, he's paid to snooze because that's his job description. Alrighty. Anonymous staff at Reuters bring us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The family of a man fatally shot by U.S. teenager Kyle Rittenhouse during racial justice protests in Wisconsin last August filed a lawsuit against the city of Kenosha and local law enforcement, citing their alleged relationship with white militia members. Well, you know, they gave him water, said, hey, thanks for being here, and shared some intel and a few other things, you know, like a conspiracy. The federal lawsuit was filed by the family of Anthony Huber, one of two people shot dead by Rittenhouse, then 17, with a semi-automatic rifle during the street protest on August 25th of 2020. Huber, 26, was killed when he tried to disarm Rittenhouse with a skateboard. Rittenhouse of Antioch, Illinois, you know, he crossed state lines to commit a murder, is awaiting criminal trial in November on charges of first-degree intentional homicide and first-degree reckless homicide in the killings of Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum. He is also charged with weapons violations and other crimes during the protest over a Kenosha Police Department officer's shooting of Jacob Blake, a black man. In addition to the city and county of Kenosha, the lawsuit names Kenosha County Sheriff David Beth, former Kenosha Police Chief Daniel Miskinis, acting Kenosha Police Chief Eric Larson, as well as John Doe Kenosha Police and Sheriff's officers. The lawsuit claims that they conspired with white militia members, signaling their tacit approval to engage in violent, dangerous behavior. Defendants' open support of and coordination with the armed individuals in the minutes and hours before the shootings deprived Anthony Huber and other protesters of the basic protections typically provided by police. It was a license for the armed individuals to wreak havoc and inflict injury, the lawsuit says. If Kyle Rittenhouse were black, defendants would have acted much differently, the lawsuit argues. Many of the armed individuals with whom the defendant departments had allied themselves are avowed racists, the lawsuit said. Neither Kenosha Police, Sheriff, nor city and county governments immediately responded to Reuters' request for comment, because they never do. And the lawsuit was filed on behalf of Huber's father, John Huber, in U.S. District Court in Milwaukee, and does not specify any monetary damages. Jonathan Stempel of Reuters brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The National Rifle Association has failed to root out rampant internal corruption, even after a bankruptcy case designed to avoid that obligation was thrown out, New York Attorney General Letitia James said in a court filing seeking to dissolve the gun rights group. In an amended complaint filed on Monday, James said the NRA's concealment of questionable transactions awarding perks to longtime Chief Executive Wayne LaPierre and other insiders, disregard of good governance, and evasion of accountability have continued unabated since she sued the nonprofit last August. The amended complaint was filed after U.S. bankruptcy judge Harlan Hale in Dallas dismissed the NRA's Chapter 11 bankruptcy case in May, calling it an improper effort to gain an unfair litigation advantage and avoid James' oversight. William Brewer, a lawyer for the NRA, accused James of quoting selectively from Hale's opinion to support her case. It is now more evident than ever that the NYAG's action is a politically motivated attack, Brewer said in a statement, in an accent that you wouldn't normally pick up, but we are able to do that here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The fact is, these proceedings underscore the NRA's commitment to good governance and undermine the NYAG's case. James's accusations include that the NRA told the Internal Revenue Service for the first time late last year that LaPierre had spent charitable assets to benefit himself personally. She also said the group's treasurer at the time would not sign an IRS tax form because several NRA officials wouldn't ensure it was accurate. LaPierre signed the form and the treasurer was soon fired, James said. Founded in 1871 in New York, the NRA has accused James of violating its free speech rights because the Democrat disliked its politics and support of Republicans, many of whom have made expanded gun rights a priority. Hale faulted LaPierre for arranging the bankruptcy without telling many top NRA officials, calling it nothing less than shocking, but said 12 days of trial testimony suggested that the group now understands the importance of compliance. James is also seeking LaPierre's ouster. Kenneth Kaufman of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The FBI said yesterday, Tuesday, that it has opened an investigation into the suspected security breach of voting equipment in a western Colorado county, which Colorado's Secretary of State said was allowed by the locally elected county clerk. The federal inquiry into Mesa County's voting system comes amid an ongoing investigation by state election authorities of how election equipment passwords ended up posted on a right-wing internet blog, as well as a criminal probe of the matter by the local DA. The FBI agents are working with local prosecutors on the forensic review and analysis of county voting systems to determine if there was a potential federal criminal violation, FBI spokeswoman Courtney Bernal said in a statement. Last week, Colorado Secretary of State Jenna Griswold decertified the county's election machines, 41 devices in all, saying their security had been compromised and ordered the system replaced. Griswold accused Mesa County Clerk and Recorder Tina Peters, a Republican and supporter of former President Donald Trump, of assisting in a breach of the system during a computer software update in May, months after the November 2020 elections. On Monday, Griswold, a Democrat, said images from two of the county's election servers were leaked online by election conspiracy theorists. Griswold said Peters, along with an employee of her office and another unauthorized individual, had gained after-hours access to a secure room where the election equipment was stored. Yesterday, Tuesday, Griswold appointed the county treasurer to oversee Mesa County's upcoming elections in Peters' place, citing authority Griswold said she has to do under the Colorado Election Code. Peters did not immediately respond to multiple requests for comment, and it was unclear whether she would challenge Griswold's actions in court. When news of Griswold's investigation broke last week, Peters was attending a conference in South Dakota, hosted by Mike Lindell, the My Pillow betting company guy, and of course we know as a prominent Trump confidant. Peters told the crowd that she was being persecuted and said Griswold weaponized her position to attack people who disagree with her. Mesa County District Attorney Daniel Rubenstein told Reuters last week that his office executed search warrants at the clerk's office. The county faces an upcoming school board election in November, and the software in question was furnished by Dominion Voting Systems, which has sued Trump allies and conservative television networks over baseless claims that the company's products were used to rig the election against Trump. Well, let's go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Shattered Lives. Stillwater, the newest movie co-written and directed by Tom McCarthy, has a lot in common with his 2015 offering, Spotlight. Both use real crime stories as source material. The earlier film was based on the Catholic priest sex abuse scandal, and Stillwater is apparently based on the Amanda Knox saga. Both show the lasting impact tragedies can have on those affected. Named for the town in Oklahoma, Stillwater follows the tale of the non-French-speaking Bill, played stoically by Matt Damon, who travels to Marseille, France, to visit his daughter Allison, who is serving time for the murder of her roommate/girlfriend Allison, who claims the real culprit was a man she met at a bar and who stole her keys. She has hope in the form of an appeal when she learns that someone has stepped forward claiming to have met the mystery man and heard him confess to others that he was the culprit. Bill, played seamlessly by the talented Matt Damon, is a good old boy oil rig worker back home and is the classic fish out of water here as he decides to stay in France in the hopes that the new revelation could free his daughter. Rounding out the cast is Camille Cotin as the friendly French neighbor and Abigail Breslin, who plays Allison. This one's strength lies in its performances because at various points, particularly in the third act, some suspension of disbelief is needed to stay with the turn of events. Without spoilers, the film's title is more than just the name of a town from where the main characters hail. It's also a clue that ultimately leaves you with questions about your assumptions. However flawed, Stillwater is worth a watch. It's more drama than thriller that will leave you remembering that often scars don't heal. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. What has one head, 1 foot, and one heck of an origin story? No, it's not a strange new superhero. It's a microscopic worm called a rotifer that was brought back to life after spending about 25,000 years locked in the Arctic permafrost. Its tale is told in the journal Current Biology.
This is a long-term topic for our lab.
Stas Malevin of the Institute of Physiochemical and Biological Problems in Social Science in Pushino, Russia. He and his colleagues have spent decades probing the Siberian permafrost, and they've managed to revive a variety of interesting organisms, from a plant seed and simple bacteria to scores of more sophisticated single-celled critters.
We have isolated around 30 or maybe 40 strains already of unicellular eukaryotes.
But for some reason, people weren't totally wowed by resurrected amoebas.
Yeah, they don't respect them. Rotifer is much better.
Rotifers are better, or at least more interesting, because they're multicellular animals with a head and a body that can eat, crawl around, and make more rotifers. And considering they're more or less teeny tiny worms, they're actually cute little guys.
They don't have guys. They are all females. Yeah.
In fact, these little ladies reproduce asexually, laying eggs that hatch into the next generation of self-propagating rotifers. So they're easy to grow in the lab, although not as easy to gather in the lowlands of Siberia.
This place is relatively distant. First we go by 2 or 3 planes, then we go by boat or by helicopter.
Then they drill
1 or 2 or more boreholes. In older times, people used the first borehole as a fridge to store consequent cores in there.
Nowadays, portable freezers help them keep their samples chilled until they get them to the lab. There, Malevin and his team cut a small piece from the center of the core to prevent potential contamination with modern microbes. And then they pop it in a nice, warm petri dish.
This is called an enrichment cultivation in microbiology because those organisms are contorted, folded up, and we cannot see them even with microscope. So we need to wait until they reactivate from this cryptobiosis, come out from this permafrost piece, start moving, multiplying, and so on.
Not every sample yields success.
So usually we see nothing. It's a relatively rare event when something alive is isolated from those cores, which is also considered a kind of indirect proof that it's not a contamination, because if it was, every sample or maybe each second sample will yield some live organism. And here it's about 1 out of 20 or even more rare.
And in one sample collected in 2015, the researchers found this one little rotifer. They allowed it to reproduce and conducted some DNA analyses, which showed that although their frozen rotifer is similar to modern varieties, it's not exactly the same.
We consider it to be a new species to science.
And based on radiocarbon dating of other organic materials in the permafrost sample, they consider it to be between 20,000 and 30,000 years old.
That's approximate, but anyway, it's 2 orders of magnitude more, or maybe 3 orders of magnitude more than was known for cryptobiosis in those animals.
The previous record for frozen rotifers was a decade or so. But this gal, was around when woolly mammoths walked the planet. Now, the fact that rotifers can spring to life after a thaw is not a total surprise. entering a state of cryptobiosis allows even modern rotifers to survive seasonal changes in their local environment and more otherworldly assaults.
They were actually sent into space, into open space, and they survived, and so on.
The next step is studying how rotifers can chill for millennia and still maintain their cellular integrity.
The main mechanism actually is the suspension of animation, the suspension of metabolism up to almost zero or maybe zero state. And so they don't need energy.
They also produce special proteins that act as antifreeze or that control the formation of ice crystals, findings that could someday enhance the preservation of human tissues.
That's why we are going to study proteins that help rotifers to survive in those conditions.
And when they figure it out,
maybe we cry, yeah, we did it, or something like that. Yeah.
For Scientific Americans, 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
Sweetie, want some fruit?
You have to use the right tool for the job. A power drill is the wrong tool to slice fruit. Just like an antibiotic is the wrong tool to treat viruses, including colds and flu. Antibiotics are only needed for certain bacterial infections. When they aren't needed, antibiotics won't help you, and the side effects could still hurt you. Ask your healthcare professional when an antibiotic is the right tool and when it's not. Visit cdc.gov/antibiotic-use.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
The census is coming. The census is coming.
I'm Tom Hartman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
Actually, the census has arrived, and the attack on democracy has begun. A lawful attack because the Supreme Court in 2019 took a pass on overt partisan gerrymandering and gave politicians in power free rein to rig the system to keep themselves in power. And politicians are doing exactly that, using the new census to draw lines for congressional districts and state offices so that the election results as a practical matter will be determined before the votes are cast. Sophisticated computer algorithms make this possible to a high degree of certainty through a process called cracking and packing. For example, pack all the minority community votes into one district and then give all the rest of the districts to yourself, or alternatively split those votes into many districts so that they can have no real influence on election results. Both major political parties gerrymander, but Republicans now control the process in 20 states, as opposed to 10 for the Democrats, and the Republican-controlled states include Texas, Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina. Which means, as the New York Times recently reported, that without federal legislation to make the process fair, control of the House of Representatives in 2022 could be decided not through winning hearts and minds and political arguments or votes, but rather simply by drawing lines on a map.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because democracy and advocacy begin with you, and freedom can't defend itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1949. That was the day that is remembered as Kemi Bloody Thursday in Finland. 2 strikers were killed. Kemi is a lumber town in northern Finland. The lumber workers in the area went out on strike when the government proposed slashing their wages by more than 30%. The strike was soon joined by sawmill and dock workers. The walkout caused a massive logjam on the Kemijoki River. On the fateful day, 3,000 strikers engaged in a peaceful march. They encountered armed police and a confrontation ensued. Police had guns on their side. The workers only had sticks and stones. 1 striker was shot and killed. Another was hit by a truck. Finnish army troops were called into Kemi. 32 strike leaders were arrested. In response to the violence, sympathy strikes were called by other unions, including the Seamen's Union. These strikes were seen by many as a fight between the Finnish elected government and communists in the nation's trade unions. Officials in the United States worried the strikes were an attempt by the communists to open the door to intervention in Finland by the Soviet Union. After World War II, Cold War politics shaped responses to labor struggles in many nations. A song, Fly Black-Winged Bird, remembers the fallen workers. The lyrics, translated into English, began, Fly, black-winged bird, with blood on your feathers across the lands. From village to village, carry your message. Open up autumn sky for the sad news to spread. Shame on a country where an unarmed man gets shot. Shame on the one who calls the shots. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, weather from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Oh my! It is so much cooler than it's been, and it's very nice. We will have sunny conditions today with highs in the low 80s, which is another respite. A tad warmer than yesterday, which was quite lovely. Very clean air. Blue skies. It was such a respite, as I stated. And winds will be out of the north at 5 to 10 miles per hour throughout the day. Clear skies overnight. Lows in the mid-50s again. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Sunny conditions tomorrow with highs nearly the same, about 84 maybe. Winds will have shifted, though, out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon. The county that leads the whole state in the surge in infections have now surged again. Confirmed cases now stand at 152,093. And we have now 5 more confirmed deaths. And we stand at 175. And the people here, a lot of them, continue to fight even simply wearing a mask. Grass pollen is rated as low right outside the window here at the mothership in Rogue River proper. The air quality index, though, for the region is moderate at 55 parts per million. At the mothership, it's somewhat lower than that, still in the good range, but it just means we'll be closing up and having filtered air throughout the day. Daytime UV index remains high at its oncoming fall level of 7. Barometric pressure is holding steady currently at 30.11 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles. And relative humidity is at 88%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 72 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 70 degrees and mostly cloudy. Rome is 87 and partly cloudy with it looks like thunderstorm activity that could affect the electrical grid. Kyiv is 70 degrees and partly cloudy. Kabul is 80 degrees and clear. They're still trying to clear out as many American citizens as they can and bring them home. They're still doing that. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 80 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 55 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 57 degrees and mostly cloudy. And New York, New York is 78 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Eric Gaillard of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. French firefighters, hampered by strong winds, were battling to contain a wildfire in the hills behind the coastal town of Saint-Tropez on Tuesday as campsites packed with holidaymakers were evacuated. Around 900 firefighters and planes carrying water were tackling the fire, but it was still not under control nearly a day after it began at a highway service area. Authorities urged those evacuated not to try to return to their homes. French President Emmanuel Macron left his nearby summer retreat to thank the firefighters for their efforts. The worst has been avoided. We must remain humble in the face of these events. Climate disturbances will lead to much more fires, he said, adding that France had been less badly affected than some other countries in southern Europe. Waves of extreme heat have hit much of the Mediterranean region in recent weeks, with wildfires from Spain and Greece to Turkey raising uncomfortable questions over global warming and various countries' preparedness. The French fire, which hit several villages in the southern Var region, spread quickly overnight as high winds propelled the blaze across 12,350 acres of land, burning through some 10,000 so far. No lives were lost in the area, authorities in Var said, but around 100 homes were destroyed. A campsite in Grimont was razed to the ground. Charred mobile homes were scattered across the site.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Renju Josie of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Sydney's Delta outbreak has not peaked, and residents must brace for more deaths, authorities said today, as Australia's largest city continued to break records for new daily infections despite a nearly 2-month lockdown. We have not seen the worst of it, and the way that we stop this is by everybody staying home, New South Wales Premier said to reporters in Sydney. New South Wales reported its biggest daily rise of 633 new cases, including 545 in Sydney, eclipsing the state's previous daily high of 478 that hit on Monday. 60 people have died since the first Delta case was reported on June 16th in Sydney, including 3 confirmed on Wednesday today, with only about 28% of people in New South Wales above 16 years of age fully vaccinated. The chief health officer warned there would be more deaths if cases continue to rise. Only 1/4 of the adult population is fully vaccinated so far for the nation, putting pressure on Prime Minister Scott Morrison, whose government missed its initial vaccine target. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.